Well, hello, brigade members. We have a special treat today. We have Miss Susan L. Patterson joining us from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. I'm so happy and delighted that she's here. She has agreed to generously give her time to give you a little insight as a program director and the do's and don'ts, best tips, practices for actually approaching a foundation. So just a little background on Susan. Susan L. Patterson is a program director for the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. She's responsible for grant making in Charlotte and as a member of the Knight Community Information Challenge team. She joined the foundation in 2001. But before joining the foundation, Susan was an editor and publisher of the Union Recorder newspaper in Milledgeville, Georgia. There she was on the executive committee of the United Way of Central Georgia and was president of the Milledgeville Baldwin County Habitat for Humanity and was the organizing chair of Kids Voting Milledgeville. What do I have here? Also, I have a little more about her. Prior to moving to Georgia, Susan filled a number of editing positions at the Charlotte Observer and the Charlotte News, the last being editor and publisher of Lake Norman magazine. She helped organize the Observer's first Habitat house building effort and its first Christmas Bureau volunteer team. A native of Shelbyville, Tennessee, Susan is a graduate of the University of Tennessee with a bachelor's degree in communication, and she's a graduate of Leadership Charlotte and is an America Leadership Forum Senior Fellow. She's a former chair of the Women's Impact Fund and a collective giving group in Charlotte with 400 members. Okay, Susan, how do you find time to do all that?
Well, luckily I didn't have to do it all at one time. That's spread over a long career.
So I'm very, like I said, it's a treat to have you with us. So thank you so much for that. I want to just, if you're ready, I'll just dive into a few of the questions that I came up with and really led by many of our brigade members as they're transitioning, as CFA is transitioning over to having them become brigades, full functioning brigades with fundraising duties and affiliate models. There's a possibility of them having a larger budget and so them actually having to go after larger ask amounts. So just having a background on the who, what, where, and when, as I keep telling them, of a foundation and having your firsthand knowledge, it will be extremely helpful. So I'll dive into the first part of it, which is prospecting foundations. Okay. So one of the questions that's usually asked is, how do I identify foundations that will support my work?
Well, that's a really good question. So I have several ideas about how to do that. There's the formal approach, which is the Foundation Center actually has an online directory, which is a great database of foundations that you can slice and dice a million different ways, either by geography or by grant making focus area, etc. There is a subscription fee for that, but most public libraries tend to have a copy sitting in the library. So if you go, I would check with the reference desk at the library. If you haven't been in a library in a while, this is a good time to go back, see what they're all about, and they can help you actually use this database. My other idea is really less formal, which is to think about organizations that are doing work that may not be technically similar, but somewhat similar. So this is a bit of an off-the-wall idea, but let's just take the Girl Scouts, which do a lot of work with young women and getting them interested in engineering, technology, STEM. And so, I might just take a breeze through the supporter list for that organization and see if there are foundations that you can identify as probably being interested in the technology piece of Girl Scout work more than their camping piece, or other components of the Girl Scout program. And so these just become leads. It's a way of just identifying potential interested parties, both individuals and foundations, frankly.
Well, I'm so glad. Thank you. You touched on that because actually earlier this morning we had a bit of a fundraising seminar, workshop, webinar, and I was telling them how also important it is to diversify the revenue stream and bring the individuals as a part of really having a robust portfolio. So that's a great tip for them to know that they can actually also look at individuals who support.
Yes, in fact, I would say they should spend more energy on that than on foundations, frankly. So I sit in a foundation, and so I have a bit of a different view. I think we can be a tough nut to crack. So I know that you're likely to ask me about this, but I'll just jump right into it, which is, well, how do you build a relationship? How do you meet foundation people, program directors, or other staff? And I think it really varies from foundation to foundation, frankly. So the grant making staff may be very easily accessible. Their email address may be posted online and you can email them directly or call them directly. On others, there is a maze, and you may never get through the maze to the person that you most want to speak to. So I think foundations can sometimes be a source of big dollars, but it may take you a long time to get to them. So, I think especially for a young startup organization, I'd go looking for those passionate people that really care about the work you're doing and inviting them to invest in your work, because they could be working for a tech company, or they may wish that they did, but they may be an investment banker. But they've got some money that they want to invest in good work in the community. And I think to start, finding more smaller donors to start is actually a great way to build interest in and support for your organization.
Wow, that's extremely helpful. I know they're really going to be happy to hear that because it's just a reiteration of some of the conversations that we've been having over the past couple of weeks. So thank you for that. And now, if they decide to say, okay, we've diversified our revenue, we're going to after individuals, but maybe there is a foundation in there that actually would give to us, but we're fiscally sponsored. We're a fiscally sponsored organization.
Mm-hmm.
How likely would they be to actually receive some type of seed funding for general operating support or capacity building support, which is an number one question, because as they start up, the big thing is, how do we get money to build our staffing, our salaries? What do we do? But we're also fiscally sponsored.
Yeah, I think in a way the fiscally sponsored piece is less critical in a way than whether or not a foundation is interested in starting up organizations. And I think, so whether or not you currently have your 501c3 status or you're still using a fiscal sponsor, in some ways is not the question. I think the question is this funding organization, foundation, really interested in startups? Because many of them are not. And I think the way to learn about that is to really review the grants that they've made. You can really tell. Do they talk about either capacity building or helping a new organization grow? Or are they really, when you look at them and you look at their grant history over several years, are they giving to larger established organizations? So I think the fiscal sponsorship is really just a step in the development of an organization, and that's a neither yay or nay. It's just a piece of the process, and I don't think that would be where the no would come from.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, okay, so I'm a brigade and I have found this foundation, and Yes, they will support me, fiscal sponsored or not, and they will give general operating support or capacity building. Wow. So now what do I do? What's the best practices or a few tips to cultivating and stewarding that a relationship with a program officer? Where do I even start? I don't know him or her. How do I even start leveraging that relationship and get in the door?
So, so is your question about before you get a grant from this organization in hopes of getting a grant?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, that can be tough. And again, it really just depends on the foundation itself, I think. Some are much more open, have much more of an open door policy. But because you don't know, I think there absolutely is no harm in sending an email that introduces you, introduces the brigade, explains a little bit about the brigade. If you've done your homework and you have a sense that they're going to understand what the brigade is about before you even do the outreach, then you're ahead of the game. I think if you're going to start, pretty much at ground zero, and they're not going to even know, if they've never heard of code, they've never heard of brigade, they don't know about hackathons. I mean, if you're starting from like nothingness, I think that's going to be a tougher thing because it's going to take a while to explain all that before you even get to your ask, if you will. And I do think your first ask is not for money. I think your first ask is for some time, really,
Wow. Okay.
because it really often is about a relationship and really trying to understand. Often for me, it's trying to understand who's involved, So on paper, an organization may sound great, but you need to build a relationship and kind of understand who's involved and what their real um, hopes and desires and that really comes from some face-to-face conversation, I think. So I think you want to give them a little context and then just request a meeting, and I'd say ask for 30 minutes. You might get more than that if the conversation goes well, but I think asking for 2 hours will never get you in the door.
That's also very good to know. So really don't try and pack everything into that one kind of informal meet and greet type meeting. Just a
Right.
30-minute quick snippet. And then is it should they actually follow up? Is it how important it is for them to follow up? And within what time frame? A week, 2 weeks after the conversation or the meeting?
Well, I think that's one of the questions you ask when you're in the meeting with the person, which is to say, may I follow up with you in a couple of weeks, or what is your process? What would you like to hear back from me? Are you interested in hearing back from me? Should we wait a little while, give you a little time to think more? Is there more information I can send you? I think there's a lot of information you can get to figure out what the best follow up strategy is. At the very least, a brief thank you note is appreciated and smart, because it, keeps you in their Rolodex. Um, for those who don't know what a Rolodex is, I apologize. A contact list. But all of that's really good. I think again, it's part of building the relationship, actually.
Okay. And so now, once I'm starting to build this, and I realize a little later on that the program officer gets back to me and says, you're really not right now, you're not a great fit for our work. How can I actually continue to leverage that relationship that I started with the program officer for possible future referrals, for another opportunity that he or she may hear at another foundation? Or maybe as I'm growing the brigade, I actually would like their advice. Is that, or will they, is that still a possibility to leverage that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think oftentimes, frankly, for me, that's often been more where I can help rather than in making a grant. It's really trying to help make a connection with either another foundation or just another individual that I think would be interested in the work. So I think it's really fine to ask for that, which is to say, well, thanks for your time, and for helping us think more about this. And is there someone that you think would be interested? And if so, will you make the introduction for us? Because that often is worth a lot. So I think it's really quite fun to ask for that. And I think most people, again, really wanting to be helpful rather than not, will try to figure something out.
Oh, good. That's a very big question also, because you never know what's appropriate, especially after you hear a no. And I'd actually, before I get into the next question, I'd like you to actually to say how many times they might get that no. Is that more prevalent than the yeses?
Yeah.
And if
Well,
so, should they be growing thicker skin?
well, I think unfortunately, probably true that they'll hear several no's before they hear a yes. Um, because I actually say no a lot more than I say yes. And I think it's the nature of the world. I mean, there are a lot of needs, there are a lot of ideas, there are a lot of opportunities, and sometimes it's a matter of timing. I also would say I don't think one no means always a no. And so today this foundation may not be interested in your work, and 2 years from now, they may be totally interested in your work. And 2 years later, they may not be interested again. This is a kind of the way the foundation world works as well, is in some ways, you can't always look at a historic grant list and know for sure that they're going to be interested today in what you see. So I think you have to be a little, as you say, a little more thick-skinned maybe, but also just know it's the way of the world. None of us are static. And I think the way foundations make grants and think about their priorities really changes. It changes with leadership, it changes with board direction on policy, and some of that may not be readily apparent in looking at websites, frankly.
Okay, that's good to know. So now I'm as a brigade member, I've made the contact, I've done my relationship, I'm ready to actually submit either a letter of inquiry, whichever the program officer just says. Of course, the foundation is going to decide. So I'm either going to write a letter of inquiry or a proposal. Now, how do I actually go about that? What are the key components that needs to be in that content that I should emphasize? Is it how my evaluation metrics, or is it a statement of need, or should I really start focusing on clarifying and refining the outcomes? What part of that, all of that, is really
Right.
it's going to be the clincher?
Well, I think it's really what is it you want to do? How are you going to do it? How are you going to know if you're successful at it? And how long is it going to take you? And how much is it going to cost? If you can answer those 5 things succinctly so that I could glance at it and go, oh, I get this, I get what's going to happen, I have some confidence that they can deliver on that, then I think you've done your job. Now, whether or not you do a letter of inquiry or a full proposal really, again, depends on the required paperwork at whatever organization you're dealing with. And they may ask different questions. But essentially, if you can't say what it is you want to do with the money, then, you know, and be really specific about it, um, then I don't think there's much chance much is going to happen, frankly.
Okay. And to piggyback on that question, as part of that, I'm going to say, if I ask for a project specific, the budget is pretty essential in terms of it needs to actually relate to the ask amount. Is that correct? So if
Yes.
I'm asking the foundation, say for $5,000, I really have to justify that in the budget of where, when, and why.
Yeah, and I think again, different organizations look for different things. if you're just asking for general operating support, then they're going to want to see what your operating budget looks like. But if you're asking for support for a project, then you've got to really detail the project cost and what the contribution. You don't have to say, "Oh, your 5,000 would pay for this piece," but you need to see how the money fits in there together. So, yeah, you gotta make those numbers add up.
Okay. And so while we're talking about writing it, if any of the brigade members feel I've got a bit of feedback saying, I'm not a strong writer, should I actually hire someone to do this? And we don't have the obviously the monetary, we don't have the resources to do this. Or should I actually just make a good effort as long as I do exactly what you said, answer these questions succinctly and as clearly as possible?
Yeah, I think to begin with, I would not recommend spending money to write a proposal. I think it's more important, again, I mean, even if it's bullets, I mean, if the best way for you to tell the story is to do it almost in outline form with bullets, but you can read through it and get the gist. To me, I'd almost rather have that than 3 pages of flowery stuff. And at the end, I'm still not sure what we were talking about. So, it's about clarity. It's about understanding what your resources and um, abilities are and just making the most of them. So I would say I wouldn't stress so much on that. If they have questions about it, they're going to ask you. If they've got forms that you're going to have to fill out, you're going to have to fill them out anyway. So, on the front end, I think just trying to tell the best story you can tell. And, if you're creative and the best way you could do it would be a fancy dancy PowerPoint, then, use what you've got to tell what you need to tell.
Okay, that's also very helpful because there's a lot of the brigades out there that if this is a start, this is starting something new, and the confidence level may be that wow, I can code well, but when it comes to writing, I think the assumption is that it has to be flowery and it has to have a little bit of fluff to it, and that would impress you. So it's good to know. Stick
The
to the
fewer
facts.
adjectives, the better.
Great, good to know. Now, my next question is now, and it's still it's on the lines of if I am selected. We did this. We did the bullet points, and everything was a go. We're selected as a recipient to receive this award. What is the best way as a brigade that I honor that selection process and really meet the desired outcomes that the program officer, the foundation is looking for? Is there any best practice tips that I could keep managing also the outcomes that I said that I would have for the foundation?
Well, I do think the first order of business really is to be sure that you and the foundation are in agreement about the outcomes. So, you'll get some kind of document that says, I'm going to take the money, and you have to sign off on that. And at that point, I think it's really fair to circle back around and say, this is what I understand you expect me to do. Is this what you expect me to do? I just want to be sure we're on the same wavelength. Everything's cool. And if that's the case, then I think you're good to go. I think if at that point there is a little bit of difference of interpretation about the outcomes, I mean, you want to know that at the beginning. You do not want to get to the end and find out that what you thought you were doing was not at all what they thought you were doing. And then you've got two unhappy campers, not just one. So I think that's fine. Most of that should actually show up in the documents along the way. But I think it's always good just to clarify.
Okay. Okay. And now that I've secured this, my first grant with the foundation, what are your thoughts on when I go back to them to ask for renewal? Because, I've got this relationship, I've cultivated it, I've secured a grant. What's your thoughts on going back and applying for a renewal grant and asking for a multi-year grant?
Well, I'm going to break those apart because, again, this is where you need to understand kind of how a foundation operates. Knight Foundation doesn't tend to do renewal grants. So
Oh,
if you go into it with an expectation that you're just going to come back next year and get another grant, then you're going to be disappointed. Now, if I've done my job, I should have made that clear to you from the beginning so you wouldn't have that expectation. But I think, again, as you're in the process, you should ask that question. Will you be open to me come if all goes well and we're all happy at the end of the first grant, will you entertain another grant request? Because I think they will tell you whether or not their policy is yes or no, because most organizations kind of have that as a standard operating procedure. So that's one piece. I think the multi-year request piece is a different question, though.
okay.
Because Knight doesn't do renewals, but we often do multi-year requests. And so the way those work, though, is in essence, it's a renewal in a sense, because we have agreed upon benchmarks, outcomes for the first year. If you hit them, then that triggers the next year's payment. And then if you hit them again, it triggers the third year. So some of that just tends to be how a funding organization prefers to go forward. In any case, you'll have to deliver on what you said you were going to do. With this caveat, we all know that things don't always go swimmingly, perfectly, as described in the original grant proposal. And I think for most of us in the foundation world, we know that things are not going to go perfectly. It may take 3 months longer to hire a staff person than anticipated. It may be that you tried what you thought was going to be the perfect outreach strategy to get people to come, and not as many people as you hoped would come. So we know these things are going to happen. And we actually want you to tell us that. And then we want to know, well, when you saw that, when you experienced that, what did that tell you about your work going forward? So what did you learn from that? So that when you go to do it again, so hopefully the next time you did the outreach, you wouldn't try the same thing that didn't work before. You try to figure out, well, what didn't work? What will we do differently this time? And then take note of that. So I think we know that sometimes things are not going to go as originally planned, but we want to understand, and we want you really to understand what didn't work and what that means for you and your work going forward. I think with that and with an openness around that, I think you'll still be fine.
Oh, that's very helpful because I know a lot of and even for myself, as not just the brigades, but even as a fundraiser myself, sometimes it can be a little intimidating to have that honesty of this didn't work. You want to be transparent, but the quickest thing is to say we want to please the foundation so we get repeat funding or a multi-year grant. So let's see if we can, say it this way so it doesn't seem as bad. But really what you're saying is no, let you know, because that means for you've seen that I'm learning from the
Yeah,
challenges.
I think as long as you do the second piece of it, which is to say, yeah, this didn't work, and this is what we took away from that.
Okay.
It's like if all you say is that it didn't work, well, that might not engender a lot of confidence. But I think if you say, but it didn't work, and then we realize that we could have done this, this, and this, and the next time we're going to do this, this, and this, then I think that tells you something different, which is you're paying attention, you're learning, and you're not going to stay stuck somewhere that didn't work.
Okay, good. All right, and I just have a few more questions, and then I'll give you back your time. I'm learning for myself. I'm learning so much. Alrighty, so when I've gotten the grant and I'm, of the agreed upon outcomes, all of that has been taken care of. Now I have to report on the grant, which I'm not mistaken, is usually about a year after the award of the amount that's awarded. Now, are there any best practices when it comes to reporting on the grants? Like, do I need to really detail my outcomes? Will that,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
think that actually will become part of the original grant agreement, actually. So different organizations have different reporting structures. Some want a lot of details, some don't want so much. Some want to focus on what you learned, not so much what you did. Um, and in almost every case, they're going to want a full accounting of their dollars. So in every case I can think of, you're going to want to keep tabs of the money, and be able to tell how you spent it, effectively and the like. But I think that, that really, I mean, I'm hesitant to make generalizations about that because I think every organization has a preference. Many of them have forms that they will require you to use. I mean, I think it's a fair question at the point that you're getting the grant to ask again, what will be your reporting requirements and expectations? How much detail will you want? What is the emphasis on? We want to give you back what you want. So give us a heads up on what we need to pay attention to going in. I think that's a very fair question and can be easily answered.
And this is the wrap up question that I have for you, staying on the reporting. I know some foundations do ask for interim reports, which is usually 6 months into the grant period, and then a final report. Now, would there be a red flag if the language from the interim report is included in the final report? Should we not repeat the same things?
I'd be surprised about that. I think the reason for the interim report, especially for startup organizations, is really to kind of help you all stay on a timetable. It's like, okay, we want to hear from you in 6 months. We want to be sure something's going on. It's not like you wait until the last 30 days and then bingo, it's all going to happen. So, I don't think there's a red flag in repeating. I think you want to build on the information, though. If that's all there is, and then nothing happened in the last 6 months, well, that's not good either. So, but otherwise, I think it builds. It's a story that builds. You're going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that 6 months is in the middle, and there you go.
Okay. And actually, I said that was my final question, but this is the very final question because as we're talking about this, I realized it's important to also to ask this one major question: How important how important is it to meet deadlines?
Well, I'll say they're important. They are. And then I'll say that again, life happens. We know that sometimes things don't all happen precisely in the time frame that we expected. So we as have a policy that allows for no cost extensions for grants, again, because things may be slow to start and everything's not finished in 12 months. It may take 15 months. Well, we're fine. And we really would rather have a final report and a final accounting of the dollars at the end of the completion, not 12 months in when we've still got hanging activities and money to be spent and the like. So yeah, I mean, I think you have a deadline, you want to shoot for the deadline, but this is where communication is key. If you know a month out that you're not going to hit that 12-month end, then I think you just need to be communicating and saying, this is where we are. What we'd like to do is extend the grant period. Here's why. Here's what we're going to do. Here's where we are on the money. And usually, that's not going to be a problem.
Okay. Wow, this was so informative. At least I know for me, and hopefully the brigades have an amazing takeaway from this. And just to recap, so what I'd be hearing is for the prospecting of it, just starting out of a new relationship, find these foundations that fit into the work that you're doing. Find those that are going to support you in this work. Building the relationship also requires just reaching out, finding out who's in charge of who the program officers are, and actually talking to them about it, and realizing that as a startup, if they don't understand that work, then it may be a little bit of an uphill battle.
Right.
So that's what it sounds like. And then just as for the proposal submission, it's just as a recap, it just sounds like write it very clear and concise. Who, what, where, when, and how. How are you going to do the work? Why do
Right.
you need the funding to do the work? And what are the needs that you also see in the community that you are fulfilling with this work?
Right.
And then the next part of it, what I'm also hearing is just when you're submitting, make sure not only that it's clear, don't worry about if you're not the best at writing, make a good faith effort in doing this. Just be clear about it.
Yeah.
And then don't make assumptions when it comes to renewals or
Right.
multi-year. Really get as much clarity up front. This is what also a part of this relationship is in communication. Clarity up front, so there's no assumptions
Right.
on the table. And
Right.
then for the reporting, as you said, just make sure that we're reporting on things that we did, and being transparent about it. Sometimes there are opportunities, but there's a lot of times going to be challenges, and be clear and transparent about that.
Right.
Did I cap that off?
I think you did. I think
Is
you
there
did a good job.
anything else you could add that you may, another takeaway that the brigades, I mean, you gave us a wealth of information, but there's anything else that you may want to add to
Oh, I
kind of,
think the only thing I'd add is don't be discouraged. You'll find somebody out there that will be every bit as passionate about what you're doing as you are. So just
oh,
keep looking.
wonderful. I want to thank you so much for your time, your knowledge, your expertise. I couldn't have asked for a better person to speak to about this.
Ah,
And I
well, I
know that you're
enjoyed it.
retiring, all the brigade members. Wish her congratulations on her
Oh, thank
retirement.
you. Thank you.